reflect on all of that as the CEPAC takes votes on clinical effectiveness, comparative clinical effectiveness, and also what we frequently call potential other benefits and societal factors on the way to thinking about overall value. So with that, we do have our patient experts and clinical experts with us as we start to look at this again. And why don't we go ahead to the next slide, which shows the first voting question. All right, I just need to read some of this as background. The patient population for all these questions is adults with an established diagnosis of schizophrenia who are not considered to have treatment-resistant schizophrenia. That is mirroring the eligibility criteria for the pivotal trials for KarXT. We will be talking, however, about patients who have a diagnosis consistent with or an experience consistent with treatment-resistant schizophrenia on the policy roundtable. So think of that as the patient population. And then when we're thinking about the antipsychotic therapy for these questions, we want to make sure, again, that the therapy you're thinking of, whether it's KarXT or another drug, is being used for maintenance treatment and, well, KarXT in this case, and the comparator therapy and other second-generation antipsychotic treatments are all available as next-line treatments if the chosen therapy is ineffective or is discontinued for adverse effects. So we're trying to, in a sense, give you a view of the real world, in a sense of what the antipsychotic therapy is looking like as we think about the evidence that we have today. So first voting question, and I actually have one other contextual issues. We're not going to vote yet. We're going to talk and review on the evidence. But I just want to make a general statement because I think it's it may not be that evident, certainly to people who are not very familiar with ICER meetings and the types of voting questions that we have. Sometimes we are taking a vote on the evidence related to whether a drug is viewed as safe and effective at all for anybody, for an indication that's likely to be considered by the FDA. And sometimes that is really not the issue. The real issue is more its comparative clinical effectiveness versus other available options that patients will have. And in this case, we just wanted to make sure that people are aware that we are not having a vote on whether this drug, KarXT, is or is not safe and effective for the treatment of schizophrenia. That's the key question that the FDA will determine for a variety of reasons, but partly because of time and what we think is the most policy relevant for patients and everybody else. It's really, should this drug be approved by the FDA, which appears extremely likely? What are the clinical aspects of the evidence for how it compares to other treatments in a variety of different ways? So I hope that's somewhat helpful. It may certainly still come up in the discussion as we lead to this first vote, which is going to be, is the currently available evidence, because payers, insurance companies, everybody right now, it's about 6 months-ish before the FDA is likely to approve this drug, but everybody's having conversations now, and these decisions are frequently preordained and framed before the FDA approval actually happens. So people are going to be thinking about this, and our voting question is the currently available evidence today to support that decision adequate to demonstrate that the net health benefit, the overall health benefit of KarXT, is superior to that of aripiprazole? So with that very long introduction, Jeff, can I hand it back to you just to very briefly summarize the findings of the report and the rationale behind the ICER evidence rating that was given?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. So just to orient folks, I think the relevant tables in the evidence summary are mostly starting on page 6, tables 4 and 5, and then on the next page, which I think got, at least in my copy, got renumbered as 1, 8 and 9, and then table 10, which has the adverse events. So we gave it an I rating. It was mainly based, again, just to remind people how to look at these tables from the network meta-analysis. for the comparison of KarXT to aripiprazole, that's the upper left-hand number. And all the first column represent KarXT versus some other intervention. And we're focusing for this question on the upper left-hand number. So in all of these cases, it's not shaded in. So there's no statistically significant difference between the KarXT and aripiprazole in all of these measures. In particular, the overall change in PANSS score, the PANSS response. We gave you the positive and negative scores, but I don't think that's quite as relevant. The change in weight, and then overall discontinuation. None of those were statistically significant. As one of the panel members brought up, the difference favors KarXT in terms of change in total PANSS score and PANSS response, just not statistically significant. And again, there was a favorable weight change, not statistically significant, but there was a trend towards more discontinuations for all reasons. And then we don't have any head-to-head data on the adverse events, but you have the adverse events compared to placebo there. So we gave it an I rating because there were no difference in PANSS, weight gain, discontinuation rates, and really because of all of the uncertainty with the lack of long-term data when we're talking about maintenance therapy. And again, this vote is about maintenance therapy, and there's no head-to-head data. So all of these estimates of the differences between aripiprazole and KarXT are indirect evidence, no direct head-to-head evidence.
All right. Good summary. All right, over to CEPAC members. Questions for Jeff, further questions for Jeff and the research team, or for the clinical experts and patient experts, or we're going to be moving towards a zone where I'd like you to start to share your reflections on how you're putting the different pieces of evidence together and the relative uncertainty and what you're going to vote. Anybody have an initial question?
Jeff, can I just ask you quickly about the relative risk in table 9 relevant to all-cause discontinuation? I know this isn't the primary issue that's going to drive the vote, but just it looks like the 95% credible interval kind of lands on one almost directly because of rounding, but it's not bolded, so I assume that the p-value is just marginally missing. So, but in any case, that 1.39 would be worse for KarXT, right?
That's right. It's a increased relative risk of discontinuation during the 5 weeks.
Okay, and it sounds like just missed the statistical significance.
Just missed statistical significance. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And Jeff, for your knowledge of there was a slide on this, but was it largely GI issues going on that was leading to discontinuation? Or do we have any way to disentangle that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I don't recall whether there was a table breaking out the reasons for discontinuation due to adverse events. So this is a mix of discontinuation due to adverse events, but it's not fully that. There's also discontinuations due to other reasons, most likely lack of efficacy and desire to change to something else. So this is all-cause discontinuations. It was a similar finding for discontinuations due to AEs, where numerically, but not statistically, more discontinuations due to AEs, and clearly the AEs that drove that were GI side effects.
Yeah. Other questions or comments from CEPAC? Please raise your hand. Okay, Megan.
Yes, I'd like to bring up a question with regard to the timing of this vote. And as I understand it, there are some trials underway that will be delivering results soon around the effect of KarXT taken chronically rather than acutely. And so how should we view the fact that there might not be evidence now, but there probably will be soon?
Well, the voting question is framed around the currently available evidence. Now, again, that also assumes that you're thinking about the current situation and all the other factors around this condition, the unmet need, the other available treatments, because this idea of whether the evidence is adequate to demonstrate it may in some ways be influenced by some of those contextual factors. But let me just let the team comment again on the timing of when some of these other studies will fall, because it is important for everybody to know that ICER knows that this is a point in time, and it's before the FDA has even approved this. And again, we do this partly because this is a phase in which a lot of the decisions around pricing and coverage start to crystallize. And so it is a time when people are hungry for reflections on the currently available evidence. But Jeff or David or others from the research team, do you want to just sketch out again when some of these other studies are likely to drop?
So go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Yeah. So the emergent 4 and 5 trials are open label extension. Well, one open label extension and another observational study. So these are not randomized trials, and those data may be out soon. We may have additional safety data at that level. From randomized trial data, the ARISE trial, which I think is adding to a regimen, although I'm uncertain if there's an arm that is just KarXT, still isn't going to really answer the head-to-head question that we'd have, although it would give us better longer-term data and might push us in one direction or another. As we were looking at this, we were faced with the reality that FDA is going to be deciding on this before that randomized trial. They are not going to have the results of that randomized trial when this drug is likely approved, which means that patients and doctors are going to need to decide whether they think the evidence is adequate before a randomized trial is available. And that's kind of how we ended up where we are right now.
Yeah, and I was just going to add the 1-year follow-up data I would expect will be presented at conference sometime this year and maybe published. But as David said, it's open label, so we'll give us some sense of discontinuation rates over a long period of time. As the company already expressed, we'll learn about tardive dyskinesia. We'll have better data on weight gain, but no comparative data from it.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie?
Thanks. One of the things I'm thinking about with this is how heterogeneous schizophrenia and schizophrenia-related disorders are, and how we know now that there's sort of a spectrum and a wide variety of ways and of ways that patients can present with schizophrenia. It makes it really, really difficult to study. And I think about that. And then the other thing I think about as it relates to this question is strength of evidence. And I think about some of our meetings, maybe looking at drugs for cancers or maybe different cardiovascular diseases. And we have really, really precise information and evidence and a really strong amount of certainty around various different questions. And we just don't have that in schizophrenia and even more broadly in psychiatry. And part of that is because it takes money to study things. And we as a society need to put money into diseases like psychiatric conditions, and I'll add substance use disorders as well, but specifically in schizophrenia and related conditions. So I think about that. I think about maybe not having as robust evidence as I would hope. And then I also think about where we are as a society and how we get evidence, and that some diseases receive more funding for research than others.
Okay. Other comments or questions as you guys think about how you're going to vote on this particular question? Jeff, do you want to perhaps mention again, just for context, why we split this question out from the comparison that's coming against olanzapine and risperidone?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that's exciting about KarXT is it appears not to have, weight gain, and thus the risk for diabetes, metabolic syndrome, strokes, heart attacks. And those are clearly a bigger issue with olanzapine and risperidone. And as we've heard, along with those side effects with olanzapine and risperidone, they tend to be a little bit more effective. So we're comparing here in the first question, a slightly less effective drug with fewer side effects to the new therapy. And then we'll do the comparison with more effective drugs, but more side effects in the second question.
Okay, I'm not sure that made it simpler or easier for anybody to take their vote, but I wanted you to kind of understand the rationale behind it. Tara, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to just elaborate on this decision and how I'm thinking about it, and just want to draw attention to the way that the questions are framed and how I'm interpreting them. So, is the currently available evidence adequate to demonstrate that the net health benefit of KarXT is superior to that of, and you can replace that with the comparator drugs. But in terms of making a decision with this, I am really looking at the currently available evidence, and I look at the analyses that are currently possible with the evidence that we have. And, it is not, in my mind, adequate to demonstrate that the net health benefit is superior to KarXT. That being said, I hear a lot of this discussion about the emerging data that's coming and the ability to do, further studies in the future, and the extreme unmet need in this population. And I feel like that, to me, is important to keep in mind in terms of coverage, because even though there's not an adequate, level of evidence at this point to demonstrate net health benefit, there is no harm that I can see in this. And we know that patients really benefit from different treatment options. Back to Stephanie's point with the level of heterogeneity, one thing may work for one patient and it won't work for another patient, and they need to go through 3 or 4 treatments. So I feel like at this point, this is something that patients really need, and the fact that there is no net harm, and this is just one more thing that clinicians have to be able to have the option to prescribe to patients, is a really important at this point in our sort of, our ability to treat these patients that, again, just have really, really significant impacts on their lives.
Good, thank you. And you guys are doing a great job of teeing up some of the conversation we'll have at the policy roundtable about how this all gets translated through into those early decisions. Jason, and then Jean.
Oh, I guess I just wanted to thank my colleague, Dr. Lavelle, for saying that. I think I have kind of similar thoughts. I mean, that's the kind of thing. I mean, eventually when this gets finished, there's going to be a final report, and there's going to be recommendations that, potentially could be interpreted in terms of formulary decisions. And I think that that's the kind of thing that I would probably advocate, that once this is, I'll just say I'm going to vote no also. But that's the kind of thing that could be put into the final report and the policy recommendations that end up being interpreted in formulary decisions. That I think I heard about heterogeneous treatment effects, a lot of uncertainty, and differential response. People respond better to one or the other. So I guess I just need to reassure my colleagues I'm going to vote no too, but I still have assurance in the process and the formulation of the final report in terms of avoiding the kind of potential harms that you're mentioning.
Thank you. Jean, as I said, and then Martha, and then I think I'm going to try to move us along so we have time both for the other clinical vote and then the rich conversation around some of the broader effects on patients and carers. Jean, go ahead.
Yeah, Stephen, you don't need a whole chorus of people saying the same thing, but Tara and Jason have both spoken for me. I will vote no. I do not want that interpreted as in any sense that this drug is not really needed, and it's really needed now. So I'll stop.
Good. Martha.
Similar, no, but also very intrigued by the mechanism of action, and very hopeful and interested to see what the next series of information will provide.
Just a real quick plug for our online platform that's called ICER Analytics, because one of the ways that we hope to kind of democratize the updates that are always in some sense needed to these kinds of evaluations is that our model will go online and people can go in and update and put in new findings, new results, different assumptions to get, if you will, a de novo finding on cost effectiveness. So that's an important part of what we hope will happen, in addition to our own continuing to screen the horizon for new data. Arun?
Oh, I just wanted to kind of share just one of my concerns, that I understand that there isn't adequate data, and I can understand some of the reasoning for voting no. My concern is that this affects insurance coverage potentially, and I don't know about the flexibility or the potential for change, like you're speaking of updating these numbers, but once this assessment is out, it's out. And this has been one of our concerns, kind of on an ongoing basis. I just wanted to voice that and hear possibly any reassurance on that.
Megan can reassure and then I will reassure and then reassure, sorry. But it's a good question to ask. Completely fair question to ask. Megan, go ahead.
I'm not going to reassure. I'm going to
You
vote
want-
yes. And I just want to put this out here that we're asked, is the current available evidence adequate to demonstrate a net health benefit? And my understanding is it adequate for a clinician to make that judgment in partnership with their patient? And from what I hear, I mean, we don't routinely have head-to-head clinical trials in terms of what's funded and what the FDA does. So we have each of these against a placebo. And I think this one looks pretty good and better than the others actually in placebo. Plus, if there's so many people who are not being effectively served by the current medication, I think there's good enough evidence, if I were a clinician, to warrant putting somebody on this and having it be covered by insurance. So I think in light of the context here, that there is adequate evidence.
Okay, I will say, and I'm going to reassure again,
Oops.
the way you framed it is, in a sense, not the way that the question is supposed to be read. The question is not whether it should be made one of the multiple options available for individual tailored decision making. It's, does the current evidence say that it's better than aripiprazole? So that's a very different question than does it deserve an equal place at the table, if you will, as these other options, which we are not asking you to vote on today. But I'm not trying to change your vote. I'm just wanting to make sure that at least you understand that piece of it. Okay, why don't we go ahead and put back up the voting slide. There are 12 voting members of the CEPAC, so go ahead and enter your vote. And we will show the results when we have all 12. There we go. Okay, 10 no and 2 yes. And all of the context and commentary, Jean's and Jason's and Megan's, and I think at least one other, maybe Martha's, will be captured as part of the context in the policy recs for sure, and will become part of our policy roundtable discussion as well. All right, let's try to see if we can get through the next question, at least our presentation on it quickly. The next question is framed exactly the same, except it's now a comparison of the current evidence for KarXT versus that of olanzapine and or risperidone. Jeff? Oh, quick.
So I'll be briefer this time. So same tables, 4, 5, 8, 9, and 10. Instead of the top of column 1, it's the second and third numbers in column 1 will compare to olanzapine and risperidone. All the same rationale applies, except that in this case, we have significantly less weight gain with KarXT than these other comparators after 5 weeks. So, 2.5 kilos, 5 pounds or so in just 5 weeks. And you heard from one patient how rapidly people can put on weight with these therapies. So that's the only difference. For that reason, we said, there's some promising data here. Here, it seems like there's actually a signal that these may be better, that KarXT may be better than these other 2 therapies. But again, the same caveats about lack of long-term evidence, lack of head-to-head evidence. So lots of uncertainty. So we gave it a promising but inconclusive rating.
Okay. Questions about this comparison? I'm going to cheat a little bit and do what I usually tell other people not to do, which is to actually introduce something that we will be talking about on the policy roundtable. But clinical experts, do you think, not you necessarily, but practicing psychiatrists in the United States, with the evidence available today, do you think they view that the evidence is adequate to say that KarXT is superior overall to olanzapine or risperidone? How do you think they will view this question?
Pretty negatively. I think the only medication with demonstrated superior efficacy is clozapine. And I just haven't, maybe I missed it, but I just haven't seen the data that would suggest that.
Okay. Vinod, do you have the similar different opinion?
No, I agree. If you're asking whether an educated clinician would try this drug before any of the compounds already on the market, I would suggest probably no, because we don't really know if it's as good in comparable patients. But if you're asking whether it will be used based on the history of how new medicines get taken up, my answer is probably yes, because people are always looking for something else that might not have the side effects that the current medicines have.
Okay, thanks. David?
Just as a primary care doctor who both manages psychiatric problems, but also cardiovascular problems, this feels like a really close call to me. I'm the net harms of the second generation antipsychotics weigh heavily on me on their cardiovascular effects. And so the possibility that a drug might not have that and might have almost as good efficacy or slightly worse efficacy. I'm going to be thinking about this a lot, as unfortunately, the lack of psychiatric support has caused me to have to start prescribing antipsychotics myself.
All right, Arun, I saw you had your hand up. Did you want to say something, or are you okay?
Just want to reiterate the kind of sheer importance of like side effects and the impact those have on both people's like quality of life, their willingness to go outside, their sense of shame, their, desire to seek out work, relationships. I don't think any of that should be underplayed at any point. It's so critical to actually functional improvement for people with schizophrenia and their quality of life. That's all I wanted to say.
Great, thank you. Jean?
So this is a question, and I don't think there's an answer, but I'm struggling to weigh the fact of the question, which is the quality of the evidence, with what we've already heard, and also the comments that Arun and David just had. The evidence to me does not meet the standard. That doesn't mean I think it shouldn't be available, and that doesn't mean I don't think David is going to end up prescribing it, possibly for a patient. So I'm struggling with that, and I think I just do not want any vote that I'm taking to be misinterpreted as not seeing this as something that should be used.
So noted, and it will be. Brian and Steve.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit different from our previous vote in that there is at least some evidence and perhaps premature evidence that it really does have an effect on weight gain. And I'm a pediatric pulmonologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I see a number of kids who have behavioral issues who are on some of the second generation antipsychotics, and their weight gain and what that does to their respiratory patterns and this thing called obesity related asthma is huge. So if we can use something that limits the weight gain in all age groups, I do think there may be some evidence here that makes me want to lean yes where I voted no last time.
All right, got it. I got that. Brian, you may want to play around with the angle that you're talking at your laptop, because it's a little bit in and out. But we got it. It's just a little bit hard to hear. Steve.
Just to clarify, is the question whether there's evidence that this compound has superior efficacy to drugs like olanzapine and risperidone? Is that the question, or is it a question about tolerability? Now, I realize
so it's net benefit. So it's the sum of the harms and the benefits. So clinical efficacy, adverse events, and over the long term, not just 5 weeks, over long-term use of these therapies.
Yeah, it's such a tricky issue. If I remember the results of the NIMH Katie study correctly, there were more, and the primary outcome measure of that study was all-cause treatment discontinuation. There were more treatment discontinuations due to lack of efficacy than problems with tolerability. There's no doubt that side effects are problematic. And this compound gives us hope that there may be a more favorable side effect spectrum. But we know that efficacy is an issue. Among clinicians, we tend to think of Abilify as having the fewest side effects, but maybe not being quite as effective as other drugs. And that was sort of confirmed by the CAMP study, where there were switches, there was metabolic benefits, but a lot of people, the medicine wasn't effective. So I hope that this can be a rare medication that would have equal efficacy with decreased metabolic side effects, but we just haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, thanks. Don, and then I think we'll move towards a vote. Don?
Super. I usually hang back and just listen to these conversations because they're very edifying. But as a layperson in this group, I just want to say that in contrast to the first question, on which I voted no, for me, any vote other than yes would be an act of hypocrisy. We just put my daughter on a super expensive drug that ICER has previously evaluated based on what I would consider to be a very small but promising bit of data suggesting that that drug will work for a person with her particular mutation, because in that space, the specific mutation matters. And just as I would want her to have access, just as I know she has access to that drug, even though it's not clear it's going to benefit her, I really think based on that weight gain differential alone, that it is important to make this drug accessible to patients with schizophrenia if their physicians think that that would be a good next step for them. So I'm going to vote yes.
Okay, guys, we have very, very little time to have further questions, unfortunately, because I really want to make sure that we talk about the broader benefits of treatment for schizophrenia. But Steve, I'll allow it. I saw somebody else dropped off, but if it can be quick, I hope. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick point about the safety considerations. There's just as scant evidence about benefit as well as harm. And muscarinic agonists have multi-organ impacts that, personally, I like to see longer-term data to suggest there aren't risks with regard to things like peptic ulcer disease, respiratory disease, potentially cardiovascular and vessel issues, et cetera.
Okay. Excellent conversation, discussion. Let's go ahead and put back up the voting slide, please. So you know the framing, the patient population. This is around the adequacy of evidence to demonstrate that the net health benefit of KarXT is superior to that of olanzapine or risperidone. Yes or no? Okay, 7 yes and 5 no. I think we heard the richness of the conversation. Thank you for chiming in, a couple of you who were going to vote yes, so that people could start to understand some of the differential balancing of these issues that's going on in your minds as you take these votes. All right, let's go to a different framing of some of this, which is what we call contextual considerations and potential other benefits or disadvantages. And these are going to be framed, again, slightly differently than you might be used to. So go ahead and show the first voting question. It is, when making the judgments that people will make of overall long-term value for the money, what is the relative priority that should be given to any effective treatment for schizophrenia? So in a sense, you can say it's KarXT if you think that the evidence is good enough to say that it works versus placebo, or any effective treatment. What relative priority should be given by our society to any effective treatment for schizophrenia on the basis of the following considerations? First, next slide, is the acuity of the need for treatment of individual patients based on their short-term risk of death or progression to permanent disability. Jeff, real quickly, again, from the experience of looking at this and talking to patients over the 8 months, what did you learn that you think would be helpful for the CPAC as they think about the acuity of need based on short-term risk of death or progression to permanent disability?
Right. For these next two questions, it's table 16, if people want to look at that in the evidence summary. So it really reflects the overall risk of things like suicide, incarceration, things like that. You have to decide whether that's more a short-term or a long-term perspective, but most of the comments on this were around, how seriously ill these patients are and the need for some sort of effective therapy. For that, and also for relationships with family, friends, and so on.
Okay. And as you foreshadowed, there is the next question coming is about the long-term burden of living with schizophrenia. So that's coming. This is more about the short-term risks for patients or people living with schizophrenia. Arun.
I just want to highlight a few other things, which is that, like with many other illnesses, early intervention is so critical for people with psychosis and with schizophrenia. It can really determine the long-term trajectory. And that's why we're continually trying to intervene earlier and earlier for this illness. It very quickly kind of takes a toll on people in terms of at the onset is in the late teens to mid-20s, typically during such a critical developmental period. Rates of suicide, like risk of dying by suicide, are higher in people with early psychosis and later on. And so I can't kind of overemphasize the kind of the risk factors early on in the illness. There are also kind of noted disparities early in psychosis, including that Black people with first episode psychosis in the US are more likely to be incarcerated than their white counterparts. So this early phase of treatment is really, really vital and very critical for high quality intervention.
Good. Any other comments about this before we vote? I think you may know what you want to vote. Why don't we go ahead and put up the voting slide? Okay, so again, the relative priority that should be given to any effective treatment for schizophrenia based on the acuity of need for the treatment based on their short-term risk of death and progression. Okay, we're waiting for one more vote. If we don't get it soon, we will move ahead. There it is. Thank you. Okay, 7 very high priority, 3 high priority, and 2 average priority. All right, so that's the short term. Let's go to the next question, which is about the magnitude of the lifetime impact on individual patients of the condition being treated. And when we talk about lifetime impact, in some ways, I feel like we should not use the word patient, because lifetime impact or something like schizophrenia, we're talking about people, right? People and their families, but in this case, the people living with schizophrenia. What relative priority should we give to any effective treatment based on that lifetime impact? So Arun, we've teed you up and you've answered this question in some ways very well already. Maybe I can invite Mark. We are going to talk about caregivers very shortly, Mark, as well. But from your perspective, please feel free to comment on the lifetime impact of a condition like this.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this issue. I don't think I can state fully enough, based on my own experience and also my wife, who holds phone calls with loved ones who've got family members with schizophrenia and sort of coaches them in terms of how to react to situations. You just have to sort of, it's hard to put into words how difficult it is emotionally, in terms of financially, legally. You've got, my son has been into 30 plus institutions. He's been in and out of jails. He's been in and out of courts. He's been beaten up by police. He's been sexually abused multiple times. And his story is not that untypical. It happens. I mean, these are people with distress conditions. And there's a big portion of homelessness you see is also tied to people with schizophrenic conditions. And so society's bring a lot of burden. Police are taking disproportionate amounts of time dealing with people with these serious mental illnesses. And So in the long term is such where you think about a parent who may have Alzheimer's and you may have to look after that parent for 5 to 6 to 10 years. My son has contracted this in his late teens. If he lives to 60, it's going to be 40 years of living with somebody with the equivalent of Alzheimer's. My wife sleepless nights, the phone calls in the middle of the night, police outside your doors. My son was hit by a car and, almost killed. I just can't tell you how complicated it is. And honestly, I've got reasonable means to take care of things. There are people in society who have nothing like that. And oftentimes their loved ones are just in jail or killed or worse. It's just a devastating illness. And so anything that can be done to sort of move the needle here, no question, both short-term and long-term. I just want to kind of impress on you the urgency to take some action, and particularly some action which might have a slightly different approach. Again, I understand the science, but I will tell you that what's the armory now, to the extent you can reinforce it with something new, I'm all for it. As a parent, I would absolutely be saying, give my son a trial.
Many people are probably going to comment on this throughout the course of the day, but I just want to thank you again for being here and for the courage of what you're going through and sharing it with this group, and obviously a much broader set of people who will be listening and reading the final report. So thank you. I think that was
welcome.
There'll be other chances when we can acknowledge what you just said. Thank you. All right. Would anybody else like to make a statement or ask a question before we vote? Okay, let's go ahead. So on the magnitude of the lifetime impact on individuals, would we give it very low priority all the way up to very high priority? 12 votes. Let's see the results. Okay, 11 very high, 1 high. All right, we go through to a few other questions now. And as opposed to thinking about schizophrenia as a condition and any effective treatment, what would we feel its value, if you will, was given these factors? We're now actually going to be talking about CAR-XT itself. These set of questions are usually meant to try to tease out whether there's something special about a new option that really would kind of give it something even more than we can count when we're looking at the health effects in a clinical trial over the short term. And this does talk about caregivers coming up again. So let's look at these questions, because this is our attempt to try to, again, be broad and to extend our thinking beyond what we can find in the short-term clinical trial data to date. So next slide. So we're basically saying, what effects do we think CAR-XT versus other clinically available second-line, antipsychotic therapy? What do we think about its, if you will, marginal effect, a relative effect would be on patients' ability to achieve their major life goals related to education, work, or family life? Again, just a little bit of the why we ask this kind of question. It's because, again, sometimes you can measure short-term health effects, both good and bad, but if the condition involves a certain time or phase of life, and there's a longitudinal aspect that more effective treatment can really benefit people's life course in a way that even expands beyond their improved health, we just want to try to be sensitive to that possibility. And again, we're not saying about any, if you will, any treatment for schizophrenia, but whether there's something about CAR-XT that would be special in this sense. Jason, and then Jean.
Yeah, Stephen, I could use sort of your counsel and maybe my colleagues as well to how to think about these questions. I, like everyone, we've heard, hopeful and optimistic about the possibility here, the new mechanism of action, all the sort of reason to have, optimism of having this on the table. But if we are not, I was in one of those no camps for those earlier questions. If we are not yet convinced of the available evidence around CAR-XT, how do we think about these questions? Could they have these sorts of beneficial effects in these domains? Or is it, do we need to be convinced that they would have those effects based on the available evidence? I'd love to hear how to think about the questions in light of what we saw with the earlier questions around evidence.
All right, good. I'm glad you asked it that way. So in a way, the first questions are generally structured to encourage you to focus on the evidence here and now, and not worry about the, if you will, the potentials that much that might or might not. I mean, you have to think about that to some extent. But here, because we are trying to capture things that we want policymakers to think about that might not be staring at them when they look at the evidence. Is there something about KarXT? And obviously you have to have some sense if you're going to vote, let's say, major positive effect or something like that. You would have to have some sense that there's a reasonable chance that it could have that differential benefit over other available treatments. You could even go back to the idea that patients, often keep trying and for some reason the others work for a while or don't work at all, and they have to keep kind of moving on. And the idea of having a different option with a different mechanism of treatment could, again, for at least some patients, create a distinctive ability to affect this longer life course. This is where that's, I think, completely reasonable, even if there's quote unquote no evidence to back that up, because we want all policymakers and clinicians and others to think not just about the black and white of the last clinical trial, but the bigger picture. So I hope that helps. Okay. I'll probably get questions about that, so it probably didn't help entirely. But anyway, Jean?
So this is probably going to feed into the policy roundtable, Steve, but I heard very clearly Arun talking about, the effectiveness of treatment at early onset. And then I also know about the pace of our current mental health system and how long it takes to cycle people through these trials of this and that and have it not work and have them fall off the radar and come back. And so what is the difference going to be? This is a rhetorical question. What is the difference going to be between trying something like this when somebody's 20 or 21 on their life course, or not waiting till they're 40 or 50 to try it? And that, I don't know, does anybody have an answer for that?
We are definitely going to talk about how clinicians view the upfront versus add-on versus wait until other things have been tried issue on the policy roundtable, for what it's worth. So that might be a better time to try to dive into that, because it's a great question. Rob?
Yeah, as a fellow member of the no voting camp on the first two questions, as Jason said, I look at these questions as an opportunity to reflect both on what this could do given the severity of the condition, and also given the really problematic aspects of other treatments for it. So I do see it more as reflecting my hope in what KarXT and other agents like it can do.
Okay, thank you very much. Martha?
I'm having difficulty with the phrasing of this question, and I find it hard, even though I share the hope that this will be a very useful intervention eventually. I don't see any evidence that there is a difference at this point. And so it's really hard for me to say anything. It's just too speculative. So I'm sorry about that, but that's how I'm feeling.
All right. Tara?
Yeah, I guess I'm also struggling with this question a little bit, just because I feel like I was, again, a no-no, one of the no-no camp in the no-no camp earlier. But for this question, I feel like there's a lot that I go back to with the heterogeneity. So if there are going to be, let's say, 20% of people that really benefit from this, because now, again, it's just one more treatment option, and there's a lot of these broader improvements because of that. Now, do I vote on that because of that? That now these patients have all these other, life options because they have really responded to this. But 80%, it didn't really do much, and they tried something else instead. So I'm really struggling with, I really want to help those 20%, but I'm not sure that, that's the heterogeneity is really kind of causing me some problems at conceptualizing this.
If it helps, and it may not, again, but one of the reasons we ask this question is because health issues can strike people in different phases of their life. And for some, it's something that strikes when they're 75, conditions that, start very late in life. And you might think that treating their health will have certain effects on their broader life. But if it's a condition that strikes people when they're children or teenagers and lasts through their formative years, again, partly this is meant to capture the timing and the chronicity of the relative benefit. So your point is not I'm not trying to say that you're not still going to be struggling with that issue of whether you do think that it's better than other options or not, but just to help people understand that part of this is to think about the when and the how long the effects are having and what broader effects that has on people's lives.
Thank you.
Arun and then David, and then I think we can, hopefully we'll take a vote on this one because we've got several other good ones to vote on. Arun, go ahead.
Sure. I think this is a question of just kind of like, what does it mean to have like a meaningful difference in treatment? And I do agree that there just really isn't that much data out there, but what we would say from our perspective and what we hear from our community all the time is that prescribing these antipsychotic medications is a bit of an art as well as a science. That so many people try so many different antipsychotics and may end up taking a first generation antipsychotic medication, which has a whole slew of side effects, and find that that actually is the most like tolerable option for them that helps them kind of, get their life back to the extent that they can. In terms of the kind of like the chronicity of this, again, I do think that having another treatment option, even if it is marginally better early on in treatment, given how little we know about the mechanisms of current antipsychotics, the effectiveness of current antipsychotics, really can potentially change the whole trajectory of someone's life. We also know that best practice interventions for schizophrenia and early psychosis involve getting them back into school, back to work, kind of back and being engaged with their social lives as quickly as possible. So something like this, even if it is speculative at this point, because of the timing of this evaluation is just so critical.
Good, thank you. David?
I just wanted to remind everyone that we do have a question 9 other coming up to specifically address this issue of just having another class of drug is likely to help out in terms of, for some people, they'll have fewer side effects or better efficacy or whatever. And so we did try to separate that off because that one is so clear. This is, I thought, more, versus what we've got now. How likely do you think it is that having this class of drug for the average patient most of the time is going to lead to greater ability to achieve life goals, as opposed to of course, anytime you have a new drug that works, there may be somebody who gets benefit from it who for some reason can't take the existing drugs, just as a way of thinking about that.
Yep. People sometimes or often worry with good reason that evidence always sends out a signal about the average in a way. And, we have a one size fits all approach. We are our own victim of that when we have our one size fits all questions that we ask you guys to vote on. And this is not a one size fits all kind of condition or treatment landscape. So apologies, but that is kind of the world that we live in. Jeff, I hope it can be quick again because.
Yeah, very, very quick. Just following up on David's comment, I think we were going to stipulate that we're actually not going to take a vote. I think we felt like it was very clear that there's real benefit because of this new mechanism of action. And we just agree that's an important element in considering the value of this drug. And we weren't even going to vote on it. I think it was the final decision. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear.
I've got it all straightened away. I've got my trumpet on that one. So we will blow that at the right moment. Okay, let's go ahead and go back to the voting question slide on patients' ability to achieve their major life goals. And this again is asking about the relative effects of KarXT versus clinically guided management using currently available second generation antipsychotics. Anything from major negative to major positive. Okay. Minor positive 7, no difference 3, and major positive 2. All right, let's go to the next one. As important as this one is with what Mark said just recently, I would like to invite one of at least the clinical experts. You see many families, many different situations. Would you like to make any kind of statement that you think would help, if not the CEPAC here, others in the future understand the impact of this condition on caregivers? And now I know we're going to be talking about the relative effects of KarXT versus other available treatments. I'd like to invite one other at least statement on how this affects caregivers. Either one of our clinical experts like to jump in on that?
Yeah, no, I think this has already been spoken to quite eloquently by others, but it is a huge impact of the illness. And we know a big driver of the indirect costs of schizophrenia over time. And I think it was Mark who described the sort of details of what that looks like. But yes, it has a major impact. So yeah, any medication that might reduce caregiver burden would be a big contribution.
Okay, Steve, let me let you go next, and then Jeff, you can go after that, okay?
Yeah, my comment is that schizophrenia is the no casserole disease. Not only is it burdensome, but it's stigmatizing and socially isolating. So just wanted to add that piece.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, I just remembering from the modeling, the average caregiver time spent is a full-time job. And so it's just clearly huge. That's all. We did see one quantitative number. And again, of course, that's an average, but huge impact.
I saw that. It was 39 hours a week. I saw that. Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and vote. I'm sorry, Arun, go ahead.
I just wanted to add a couple of other numbers from some work we've done, which is that there's kind of $4,000 a month spent on average out of pocket. There's lost wages. There's people are just like absolutely often traumatized by this. I would say like I've stopped using the term caregiver burden because it doesn't capture like the sheer level of like agony and financial impact that we hear about on a daily basis here. I think everybody seems to be on the same page with us, but I wanted to add.
Yeah, all right. Thank you for adding that. Okay, with the complexity again being that we're asking about the relative effects of KarXT versus clinically guided use of second generation antipsychotics already on the market. Please vote on the impact of KarXT on caregivers' quality of life for their ability to achieve their major life goals. Okay, this almost looks like a mirror of the previous one, if I'm not mistaken. 7 minor, 3 major, and 2 no difference. Okay, next question again is one we ask with every single treatment because sometimes there is something special about it that even if its overall health effects might be the same, there's something about its simplicity of the regimen or other aspects that make it easier for patients to manage and sustain their treatment. So here, is there something about KarXT's regimen, the complexity of its regimen compared to other available second generation antipsychotics that really distinguish it? Jeff, what's the short story on that?
I was just trying to pull that up. Yeah, I think you have to think about it. We're comparing it to orals, so clearly the once a month or once every 3 months injectables potentially have some advantages. It's a twice a day medicine, which is challenging. We know medication adherence is a big issue for patients here for many reasons. Including just not recognizing that they have an illness that needs treatment, which we haven't brought up to date. But I think a twice a day medicine doesn't offer a lot of advantages. It's potentially a disadvantage unless people really get a big clinical benefit from it.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and take a vote on this one. I think this is one of the more straightforward issues, complexity of the regimen. So KarXT versus other available second generation antipsychotics, is there everything from a major negative to a major positive effect on patients' ability to manage and sustain their treatment? One more. There we go. Okay, 7 no difference, 4 minor negative, and 1 minor positive. Okay, the last voting question. Relative to other available second generation antipsychotics, does KarXT offer anything that can help society reduce health inequities? Will it have anything from a major negative effect to a major positive effect? And again, just to acknowledge, I know we're asking you to think of two things. Does treatment for schizophrenia have an effect on health inequity? And does KarXT versus other options have a relative or differential effect on that? But let's have people wrestle with that and see what they think. Jeff, I know you've pointed out, and I think Arun, you did too, or somebody did, but there's a higher, on a proportionate basis, there's a higher prevalence in Black Americans, and they also have worse outcomes, correct?
Correct. So the question is whether KarXT could impact that. And probably, there's also economic issues, socioeconomic issues probably that play into this as well.
Tara?
Sorry, just to clarify then, I understood this question to be specific to KarXT. Is that correct?
You're meant to think about, given the current treatment landscape, KarXT falls in. Will it help society in a major way, a minor way, or not at all address health inequity?
Got it. Okay.
Steve?
Thanks. There are disparities with regard to obesity and diabetes, et cetera. Does that fit here?
I hesitate to answer your question definitively, but I would say to the extent that you think that is, an important potential for this drug and that would have an important impact on inequity. It doesn't have to be, it can be different kinds of inequity that this is addressing. It can be inequity between rural and urban, or, Black and white Americans, or different kinds of inequities. So your pick on that one. Arun and then Jason.
I just want to also highlight that it's not just Black Americans, but a couple of other communities of color in the US that seem to have elevated rates, as well as people who are immigrants. It is an illness that really kind of seems to disproportionately affect those who are marginalized in various ways. And so to be able to get treatment of any sort to a wider swath of people, I think is just a net benefit. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. We're going to try to go quickly. I'm sorry I've run us over our allotted time, but Jason, if you want to say something, go ahead. Otherwise, it's up to Brian.
Yeah, I don't want to open up Pandora's box, so just cut me off but I'll be brief as I can. So I guess the NIH now considers the disability, individuals with disabilities to be a disparity relevant population. So I know this is going to confound a lot of the votes that we take on all sorts of medical conditions that are create populations with disabilities, but are we to consider that, or are we considering disparities relevant to things like race and socioeconomic status only?
No, I think it's fine to think of health inequity very broadly.
Okay.
And even helpful to identify, if you are thinking about one thread in an equity that you're highlighting, I think that's helpful. I mean, Arun just did the same thing. It's not just Black versus white as far as inequity in this case. It's immigrant, it's likely socioeconomic status. So there are other things that are interwoven here, and the risks for chronic disability and what life like that is like in our society. I think that's another form of inequity. And again, the question of whether KarXT will have a major, minor, or no real known effect on that. Brian?
Right.
You're Brian, but you're muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, and now you're
coming better. Okay, good.
Just coming through clear as a bell, as long as you unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah. It's been a long day. Just getting to the disadvantaged populations being at higher risk, a drug that's $20,000 a year versus $40 a year, as we saw earlier, has got to have a negative impact on its societal benefits. So I just want to bring up it's not just Black, white, or whatever. It's what's this cost going to be, and we don't know what that is yet.
We are revamping, as you know, our own approach to this voting question in the future. This is where we're going to do some quality improvement. But I would also caution people that that $20,000 is a placeholder price. We are not projecting ourselves and saying that that's the price that will be in the market. You are certainly at at your own leisure to think that this will be more expensive than currently available generic options, and whether you think that that will or won't have an effect on inequity is certainly something you can factor in. But I just want to make clear that 20,000 is not a set figure in anybody's mind. Jeff, you get the last word before we go to this last vote.
Okay, thanks. I just want to remind people that inequities can get worse with new therapies, particularly if there's unequal access. So don't forget to think about that, particularly with a new drug, which often has inequitable access.
Okay, let's go ahead and bring up the voting question. CAR XT relative to the current treatment landscape. What do we think about its potential to address society's goal of reducing health inequities? Okay. Minor positive, no difference, and major negative. All right. Let's stay with that then. Now, this is we do have an other, but the other is, I'm co-opting this, or we are co-opting this because we didn't feel like it would, as David and Jeff already forecast, we didn't think it would be really necessary to have much of a discussion about this. So I'll just state it. Sometimes we do think that there's a potential other benefit for a drug that may not be quote unquote any better than others necessarily. We don't know whether it is yet, but it has a new mechanism of action. And that means that it may allow us to expand the number of people who are successfully treated, obviously, especially those who have tried and not had much benefit from other treatments using other treatment mechanisms. We are going to stipulate that this is an important other benefit of CAR XT. If it is approved, it will offer that option of a different treatment mechanism, which again, may likely lead to expanded treatment options for people who have not had benefit from other treatments. All right. I apologize, we ran over just by about 7 minutes over our break.